All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a document that, for decades, shaped American foreign policy completely from the shadows. Its official name is National Security Study Memorandum 200. You might know it, though, as the Kissinger Report. And believe me, for a very long time, it was one of Washington's most closely guarded secrets. And I am not exaggerating. For more than a decade after it was written back in 1974, this document was stamped confidential and classified. It was only passed around at the absolute highest levels of the U.S. government. We're talking the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon. Its contents were considered so sensitive that the report itself said only the White House had the authority to declassify it. And then, finally, on July 3rd, 1989, it happened. The report was released to the public. And with that, we got this incredible, direct window into the strategic thinking of that era. It revealed exactly how the U.S. government was planning to deal with what it considered a massive global threat. So what exactly was NSSM 200? Well, it was this really deep analysis of how global population growth could affect America's security and its interests all over the world. And here's the crucial part. This was not framed as a humanitarian issue. No, this was explicitly a matter of national security. The report was basically asking, if the world's population keeps exploding, what does that mean for our access to resources, for political stability, and for American power? Now, to really understand the report's recommendations, you first have to get your head around the scale of the problem as they saw it. I mean, they painted this incredibly stark picture of a world on the brink of a demographic crisis like nothing we'd ever seen before. The whole analysis kicked off with a really startling number. For centuries, it took about 100 years for the world's population to double. But the report found that at the growth rate in 1974, the world was on pace to double its population in just 35 years. That was, and I'm quoting them here, quantitatively and qualitatively different from any previous epoch in human history. The sheer scale of it was just breathtaking. The world was adding nearly 80 million people every single year. To put that in perspective, at the beginning of the century, the increase was only about 10 million a year. So this explosive acceleration, that was the heart of the crisis. And this chart really shows you where all that growth was happening. The report draws this sharp, clear line between the developed world and the developing world. In developed regions, growth was pretty slow, somewhere between 0 and 1.5%. But in what they called the less developed countries, or LDCs, it was just skyrocketing, at rates that would double their populations in as little as 20 years. Now check this out. This is where it gets really eye-opening, because this is the long-term view that was put in front of policymakers. These were the projections from the report. Just look at Africa, projected to grow by a factor of almost 7 by 2075. Latin America by a factor of 5. And meanwhile, the entire developed world, projected to grow by less than 50%. This was a forecast of a massive, profound demographic shift on a global scale. So you might be wondering, why did any of this matter to U.S. security? Well, the report connected the dots very directly. It warned that all this population pressure in developing countries would lead to huge famines, intense competition for crucial resources like minerals and fuel, and just widespread political instability, everything from food riots to full-blown revolutionary movements and the total breakdown of society. And this quote from the report just sums it all up perfectly. The authors were not being subtle. They stated, crystal clear, that instability in countries where the U.S. had interests was, by definition, a national security problem for the United States. Population growth wasn't some far-off issue, it was a direct threat. Okay, so having defined this massive looming problem, the report then laid out an equally ambitious solution, a complete strategic blueprint for U.S. action around the world. The main goal, the big one, was just staggering in its scope. To get the entire world down to what's called replacement-level fertility. That's basically an average of 2 children per family, all by the year 2000. This was the single target that guided every policy recommendation that came next. But the strategy wasn't to just target everyone equally. Oh no. The report identified 13 specific countries for a concentrated effort. And why these countries? Well, it was because they were not only huge and growing fast, but they also held, and again I'm quoting, special U.S. political and strategic interest. Put together, these 13 countries were responsible for almost half of the entire world's population growth. And the approach they planned for these countries was really sophisticated. It wasn't just about handing out birth control. The report outlined this two-pronged strategy. On one side, you had the supply side. And yeah, that was about making family planning services and technology available to everyone. But on the other side, the demand side, the strategy was to actively create the social and economic conditions that would actually motivate people to want smaller families in the first place. So what does creating demand for smaller families even look like? Well, the report identified some very specific levers to pull. For instance, providing education, especially for women, reducing infant mortality so parents don't feel like they need to have extra kids just to make sure some survive, creating jobs for women outside the home, which offers an alternative to marrying young and having lots of kids, and developing old age security so people don't have to rely only on their children to take care of them. Now, the authors of this report were very, very aware of how all this might look to the rest of the world. This quote right here shows just how worried they were about optics. They knew that if this whole plan looked like a rich country trying to tell poorer countries to have fewer babies, it would completely backfire. So the report says over and over again that they need to be subtle, that they need to encourage local leaders to take charge, all to avoid the appearance of coercion. So what's the lasting legacy of this thing? What does this blueprint really teach us? Well, it provides this powerful model for how a global superpower can think about and act on long-term strategic threats. A model with lessons that are, frankly, still really relevant today. So here's the bottom line. The Kissinger report gives us a masterclass in a certain kind of strategic thinking. First, you take a huge, complex issue like population, and you frame it as a core national security concern. Second, you directly link those demographics to things like resources and political stability. Third, you use a sophisticated two-track strategy of both direct aid and, you could say, indirect social engineering. And finally, you stress how vital it is to manage how you're perceived by working through local leaders. It's a way of looking at the world that is still incredibly influential. And it really leaves us with a critical question to think about. Now, almost 50 years after it was written, how should the logic of a one-secret memo like NSSM 200 inform our modern debates about, well, everything from climate change and resource competition to global development and foreign policy?